All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to History Fix's behind the scenes live streams. We're up again this week for our second Thursday in a row. We had a great visit with Shane Seeley last week, and this evening we are with Mr. Greg Starbuck, preservationist and director of the Hunter's Raid documentary. Greg, thanks for coming out with us this evening.
Thanks for having me.
So, I guess before we dive in, just reminding everybody, History Fix is a streaming video platform that focuses on history. All history, all eras, and we don't just look for documentaries. We're also doing features and short films and other ways for you to connect with history. Our goal is to give you a chance to escape into history and to do it in a completely ad-free way. We've started behind the scenes because I know a lot of people, I work in the film industry, and people are always asking me, hey, can I meet this person? What is this person like? What is that like? What's a grip? Well, we get a chance to look at some of this, and actually tonight I've got a picture and I can show you a grip working on Greg's show. But let's go ahead and start by saying that if you want to join History Fix and you want to support Greg and everything going on here, there is a discount code for being a part of things this evening. And to support the Hunter's Raid doc, the annual plan discount at www.historyfix.com is Hunter Raid. You see it there on the screen right now. So we'll put that back up a little bit later and talk a little bit more. But Greg, if you want to go ahead and just sort of introduce yourself for us.
Well, sure. I'm the director here at Historic Sandusky. I've been here for 21 years, but I've worked for 35 something years at different museums. I was involved in living history going back 50 years ago. So I'm probably not much different than your audience in that, I'm a history buff, but also involved in reenacting and living history, for decades and all of that.
Yeah, and I must say you've been a key part in one part of it. I'm going to flip over to a photo I shared last week, and when we see me over at Camp Nelson a couple of weeks ago, you'll see one of Greg's piece of handiwork. My cap is one of his, and it's one thing I treasure, and lots of us go for Starbuck kepi and forage caps, so that's another part of Greg's world. Question for you, Greg, as you've been doing this for so many decades, where did the history bug bite you?
Oh, goodness. Probably like most everyone in your audience, went on a school field trip in like fourth grade to Jamestown and Williamsburg and, saw all the people in funny clothes doing the crafts and playing the fifes and drums and shooting the muskets and whatnot. And I don't know if it was a past life being awakened or what, but, you get whatever you're hooked in life, you get hooked at a young age. And, so I don't even know why, but that's what I got hooked on was history.
I guess why ask why? The other half of this story is filmmaking and movie making. You've made a documentary and it streams exclusively at History Fix. If you guys want to see Hunter's Raid, you come here to see it. Where does movie making come to Greg Starbuck?
You mean, how did I get involved?
Yeah, how did you get involved? What made you decide this was a good thing to do, and what have you done?
Well, probably you remember, and probably many of your viewers remember, the 1990s were the golden age of history films. Ted Turner was making all sorts of history films, both for Turner, but he also made Gettysburg, later Gods and Generals. Last of the Mohicans. It was just a real golden age. And of course, like a lot of reenactors, I went and worked as an extra on a lot of these films, probably worked on maybe about 10 of those history films in the 90s and a few non-history films. And, just saw how a movie set operated. And, you see films from a young age, but then when you get to see behind the scenes and how all of that's put together, it's such a different and strange alternative reality, seeing how it's put together, but it's also fascinating. And, I thought, well, if I ever get a chance, that'd be kind of fun to do that myself.
Great. Well, before we get into talking about Hunter's Raid, you've mentioned a handful of films you've worked on over the year. What's a favorite and what's a good memory from one of those other shows?
Oh, maybe the Hunley, because I got picked out to get a close up and play or act like I was playing a squeeze box. Um, just a bunch of them. Ironclads worked on that and that was fun because I literally played about 12 different characters on both sides, doing different things. You know, a lot of those history films, you get on a core group, and there's about 30 or 40 people on the core group, and they get repurposed day after day for whatever background action is needed. So that was a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Well, I know music is a big thing for you. Is the squeeze box in your repertoire, or were you merely acting?
Oh, I actually do play the squeeze box, and they wouldn't let me play it on camera because then they would have to put me in the Screen Musicians Guild and pay me a lot of money, which I would have loved and I was lobbying for, but they said, no, no, we already got the music picked out. Music's already recorded, and I think they played it on set, so I had something to kind of mime to. But that was a disappointment. I didn't get to actually play the music because I could have.
I'm sorry to hear that. Well, let's talk about something I'm not disappointed about. The documentary film Hunter's Raid, The Battle for Lynchburg. I've got the movie poster up so everybody else can see it. So everybody knows Greg can't see the screen unless he's watching elsewhere. He doesn't see with me. So I'm just warning him what we've got here. This is your baby. Why don't you introduce Hunter's Raid to us?
Well, so when I came to Sandusky, this was an undeveloped historic site. It was a private residence, and a bunch of community citizens got together, bought the house, and wanted to turn it into a public museum. And of course, one of the things every museum needs is some type of film describing its history, orientation film, if you will. So we thought, well, let's do an orientation film about the Battle of Lynchburg in Sandusky's role in it. And then we said, well, we got to tell the story of of the whole Battle of Lynchburg. Really, we can't isolate just Sandusky. And then, really, to tell the story of the Battle of Lynchburg, we got to tell the story of Hunter's Raid. So the scope of what we wanted to do grew from this little thing, and we ended up, we were going to do like a 10-minute little homemade film, and then it grew to this thing that's almost an hour long that sweeps across all of Western Virginia, and that was the plan, was to do this film, and we started on it in 2006 and didn't finish it till 2010. We worked on it on weekends. I had a little bit of money from some donations to buy everybody pizza and sodas as we went along. But it was all volunteers, and there would be times we did not work on it for months, and then other times we worked on it a bunch, and we even started filming. I just had pickup cameramen, and of course, I didn't know anything about formats, and it was a steep learning curve with cameras and formats and frame rates and all that sort of thing. But eventually, a young man, Andrew Prasse, came into my clutches, and he had actually had a camera. He was a reenactor, but he had aspirations of being in film, and he knew how to edit with Final Cut Pro. So he came on board and did some camera work. But also, more importantly, he edited the film together. So he basically became a collaborator. In some ways, he was an assistant director, if you will, but he did all sorts of other things, from helping supply uniforms to extras, to camera work, to visual effects, to stage prop making, set dressing, all that.
Independent films are definitely, everybody chips in, and we're seeing a picture of you and Andrew the night you picked up a few statues, which we'll talk a little bit about later, but good to give him a nod here. So, talk to me a little bit about, well, let me just say before we dive in here, I'm seeing more and more people jump in. If anybody has questions for Greg or comments or anything, we do see the comments in the chat here, so throw stuff in. Appreciate seeing the thumbs up coming out. If you're looking to ask any questions for Greg or for us, go ahead and throw them in and I'll bounce them to you. Greg, talk to me about Sandusky. Talk to me about using it as a filming location.
Well, okay, so Sandusky is a 200-year-old house. Was built in 1808 by Charles Johnston, and he had his own really interesting history. By the time of the Civil War, it was owned by a different family, and 1864, General David Hunter is given the order to try to capture Lynchburg, and this is June, and capture Lynchburg and take it out of the war, because at this point Lynchburg is a vital supply center and transportation pipeline to Robert E. Lee for all of his food and munitions. And so if you can get rid of Lynchburg, then you're probably going to shorten the war. And so in June 1864, Hunter attacked Lynchburg, 2-day battle. But more importantly, he used Sandusky as his headquarters. So we have, 2 days of Sandusky being occupied. A lot of great stories, both written but also oral tradition about what happened when the Union soldiers were here at Sandusky, and the generals and 2 future presidents were here.
So who was there? Which 2 presidents?
Rutherford B. Hayes and William McKinley. We're here in the house, and then of course the barn was used as a field hospital, and there's a couple of great accounts of that, like field hospitals everywhere else during the war, amputations and death, and and also people being saved. So there was a lot of great history here. Sandusky was undeveloped. It was a private residence when we bought it in 2002, and the idea was to restore it, make it into a public museum. I needed to do some type of visual presentation to give the story some sizzle, because you can tell the story with your words, but if you can show it in a dramatic fashion, you get so much more traction, I think. And so we started it. We had no idea where it would end. For the longest time, I had no idea if we would ever finish it, because it was just real hit or miss, but we just kept chugging along. And somewhere during those 4 years, I actually came up with a script. And, but we also had a lot of great things done right, that got us to the end point. And we actually finished the film, and just one quick little story. When we finished the film, and you probably know this, Andrew, we had a premiere booked at a local college, and we sold tickets for like $50 in this room that's seated about 300 people, and we sold out. And we had the film edited, and Andrew had to render the film. So having the film on your computer is one thing, putting it on a disc to take it to be shown is another thing. And that morning he started trying to render the film, and the computer kept rejecting it. Like it would go for 2 hours and then it would fail, the rendering, in order to get it on a DVD. But we were really sweating it. And we were about 5 hours into the last and final render. It went through, and he burned a DVD, and I literally jumped in my car and ran it over to the premiere site and got there like 2 minutes before being late. So we didn't even know we would have it done until 2 minutes before it showed.
Wow. Well, we've talked about one real site, and that's Sandusky, and it had to be amazing to use the real place as the set. As you talk about reality, that's quite something as an opportunity. Let's talk a little bit about movie magic. There are several wonderful sequences where soldiers both come to and leave Lynchburg on a train. Talk to me about that train.
So, Lynchburg was an important transportation network. There were three railroads that came in, railroad lines that came in, and it was an important transportation center for, throughout the war, supplying Southern armies. But also during the battle itself, it was important because Jubal Early is sort of like the horse soldiers, where at the last minute, Jubal Early brings in his veteran Second Corps detached from Robert E. Lee's army, brings them in on the trains at the last minute, and they hop off, march through the streets up to this vicinity of Lynchburg, and essentially save the day. So, there's a heavy railroad element in the story. We knew we had to show that, and we just tore our hair out trying. How do we show that on a no budget film? And so, I got a couple of I got like 3 drive-bys of the locomotives at Promontory Point, Utah, the Golden Spike. The Park Service there sent me 3 video clips of locomotives rolling by. That gave us some locomotive shots, and then we need some box cars, and so we built a box car. My original idea was I just wanted to get a U-Haul truck that had a side door, and we can maybe build some wood on the inside, on either side of the door, so it looked like the inside of a box car. And then we could put a couple of soldiers standing there to frame it, and then we'll go out in the country and drive down a road, and you see the trees going by, and it looks like you're on a train. And I had a fellow, and this is a repeating theme throughout the whole film, that somebody would come into our family and bring so many skills and ideas. But I had a fellow, Daniel Dixon, who worked for a construction company, and he was he's a shaker and a mover in the city of Lynchburg. And he said, well, I really think we ought to get a container, a metal container, like a shipping container, and do this. And I was like, man, that seems like a lot of work. And it's like, no, we ought to do that. We can do that. It's like, all right. And I'll put it on a trailer. And we got a shipping container. And once we opened the back doors, we found that the dimensions were almost exactly that of a Civil War boxcar, in height, width, and length. And so, all right, well, let's get some wood, and we'll cut some holes in the shipping container. It's 20 foot. And we'll screw on wood, and we'll stain it. We'll get vinyl letters to look like the lettering for the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, And originally I was like, let's just do one side. Well, if we want to get an angle this way, we got to do the end. Oh, we might as well do the roof too, because you're going to see the roof. Like, we just kept on biting off more and more work. And then we had the idea of, well, let's and we're going to pull this behind a big construction truck to put it in motion and film from within and from outside. And he said, well, the back half of the truck, we ought to make that look like another box car. So we have 2 box cars. And then we actually built part of a 3rd box car that was just stationary on scaffolding. So when we parked the 3 together and you framed the shot just right, you actually got half a box car, a full box car, and another half of a box car. And that was how we came up with the train. And we just, goodness gracious, we went out to a local airport that's not in use anymore, and they let us roll around up and down the runways looking out of the mountains and the trees out at New London, Virginia, to get some shots. We filmed a bunch. We just filmed all over the place. It was pretty weird.
Well, I'll be honest. I've seen a lot of movie cheats in my day. This one worked from beginning to end. The train sequences with the music and the trains and the fellas loading in and off and the smoke and the civilians for the beginning and the change in tension when it becomes battle time. They're some of my favorite sequences in this entire project. So congratulations to you and the production team. And you guys kept trying to push yourself, and you pushed the right direction. That was really some of my favorite stuff in there. So it's good to hear about it.
It was a lot of fun. And the only downside is eventually for like a year or two, we had the boxcar just sitting in the backyard here. And then finally, Daniel came over and said, well, the boxcar belongs to his company. He needs to take it back. And I was like, that's fine. Oh, but we got to take all the wood off. So he got there and take all the wood planks off the boxcar. And then he had to have the pieces we cut out. He had to weld those back in because apparently 20-foot boxcars are at a premium over 30-foot boxcars because the 20-footers are what the U.S. military uses exclusively. They don't use the 30-footers. And so
we've been a little busy with them. Just to pass on to you, Greg, we've just seen a message come in from our friend John Manor down in Northern Ohio. Good evening, John. John says, hello, Will and Greg. Hunter's Raid is a great movie. Watch it often. Very well done. And John's been around the living history world. He knows what he's looking at. So that's really saying something cool.
One of the things we wanted to do when we filmed the film and edited it is there's one or two places there's a little bit of a lull, but mostly we wanted just the story to start and move along at 55 miles an hour minimum speed, sometimes faster. We wanted the story just to chop, 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 because it was, those days, that raid and the response to the raid was a lot of urgency. And so when we film stuff and we look through the footage, we can't use that clip because they don't look like the people aren't moving quick enough, like their life is on the line or their homes are on the line. So we even a few places sped up a little bit of footage because we had to have that sense of action and urgency. So that's one of the things even, I think it is I enjoy I don't watch it a lot, but when I watch it, I get sucked in because it doesn't give you a chance to go to the bathroom. It just goes. And that's one of the things we wanted to do was make an action film that just cranked along.
Well, I think you did that and you told a real story. Working between 2006 and 2010, computers aren't quite where we are right now. I don't think Andrew's probably editing on Final Cut Pro anymore. Talk to me about how you used CG and other computer graphics in the show.
So Andrew, he's self-taught editing and doing graphics and visual effects. So, in one case, the locomotive, we had a stationary video of the locomotive, and he was able to put over top of the tender, it said like 119, and he was able to put Orange and Alexandria over the tender, in the, via visual effects, and put a different smokestack as opposed to the straight stack, and put smoke coming out of it. He did a lot of that, and also we did a little bit of green screen stuff, and then we did some shots where we had a group of people, and we filmed them over here. All right, reset. Now you move over here, and then move them over here, and then he was able to put it all together, and we take 20 people and turn them into 80 people. And so for some of the crowd scenes and some of the troops marching. One of the great video sessions we had was at Appomattox, the Carolina. It was a 6th Carolina or 26th Carolina. It was a bunch of the North Carolina reenactment groups were having a living history there. And I was able to make a donation to their flag fund, and they gave me a couple of hours of their time before they opened to the public. And I had about 75 Confederates at Appomattox, although we were not portraying it as Appomattox, we were just using it as countryside. And so we were able to set up some specific shots that were really cool. That was one of our bigger shoots where we had a lot of people, We also used a lot of video from all the other documentary makers. They either donated or leased footage from at least a dozen other places, and we were able to weave that into our story. And, if somebody can give you footage of a cannon crew, that's so much easier than finding a cannon, getting people, killing a Saturday, feeding people to get them shooting a cannon. A lot of that basic battle stuff is already out there, and that's what we use. We didn't have to create much of that ourselves.
Well, that's pretty fantastic, and it's great to see the community of historical filmmakers working together on this. I know you're still working at Sandusky, and one of the great things we're proud of at History Fix is that we help push it. We push history forward by trying to make sure that producers make money for their work. With you being exclusive, we're writing checks to you regularly every quarter based on what people subscribe with us. Talk to us a little bit about how that money is able to be used at Sandusky.
Well, actually, the money from History Fix goes into our endowment fund, and so that's one of our focuses is building our endowment so that we can have sustainability and protect our future by having an endowment. That's why everyone wants to have an endowment. So that's what we're using the funding for right now is the endowment, and then the proceeds from the endowment, the interest earned on it is something I can spend, and typically I'll spend it on restoration or preservation.
Great. Well, I'll just say this, folks, so you know how History Fix works. We pay our producers based on the amount of time you watch. We use what's called revenue per minute. So every minute you watch Hunter's Raid is another minute that money goes to that endowment to help keep working on it. Let's keep working on it. Greg, talk to me about Sandusky at the time of the shoot, and talk to me about Sandusky today and how have things moved forward.
So it's sort of interesting. When we filmed the film, the house was not restored. The restoration of the house was a big effort, took probably $500,000 and took about almost 10 years total. So that was a big separate effort to restore the house. When we filmed the film, the house was not restored. The interior was not restored. The exterior was not restored. And so we've since restored the house, and it looks the way it looked back then. So if you watch the film, we cheated some things and whatnot to, and we filled it with soldiers, so you're not really paying attention to the house itself. But since the house was built, we've gone through a massive restoration effort, and which is still ongoing. We've already had to paint our shutters a second time. You're going to have to paint them every couple of years. So the house has changed a lot. It'll look a lot different in person now than it did back then when we filmed.
Great. Let me stay there, because History Fix isn't just about media. It's about history and finding a connection and escaping. Some of that's done through our platform. Some of that's done by going to historic sites. Can you visit Sandusky today?
Yes. We are open to the public by appointment. So people, you'll want to call or email to set up an appointment, because there isn't always somebody here or somebody always available. But yes, you can take a tour of the house. You can see the short version of the film. So our original intention with Hunter's Raid was to have, like a 12-minute orientation film. Well, when you're telling this big story, it ends up being 50 minutes. So we went back and cut back down a 15-minute version that we show visitors. And so we show a film, we take a tour of the house. We also have an archaeology lab here, which is probably the only archaeology lab run by a university in the state of Virginia that's used as a teaching lab. And then we have a small museum. We have a gift shop, and we have DVDs of Hunter's Raid, but not for a long time, because once we sell the last ones, we probably won't make them again, and they'll just exist on streaming.
Yeah, we're happy to fill that niche for you, and glad you're with us. I fire questions at people and all of these live streams, Greg, a couple of ones, and let me ask you this. What's one story that you would like to be able to tell as in media that you haven't been able to yet?
Well, I mean, there's probably dozens and dozens, but sticking close to home, I would probably stay with Sandusky. The man who built Sandusky has a fascinating story about how Sandusky got its name. So as a younger man, before he came to this part of Virginia. He was captured by Indians 1791 out in the Ohio Territory, was a prisoner for 5 weeks, was eventually bought out of bondage by a French trader in Sandusky, Ohio, got his freedom on his 21st birthday, made it back to Virginia. When he eventually built this house, he named it Sandusky. But he actually wrote a memoir about his whole captivity, and it is one of the best memoirs I've ever read, and it's one of the best memoirs, I think, of that era of the 1790s on the frontier with the Indians, hostile, some most hostile, some not hostile, but it's the really great storytelling, a lot of great, incredible observations about material culture. You know, he makes it in his memoir. It's just fascinating. So that would be the story I'd want to tell. And just incidentally, I'm dreaming that. So Charles Johnston's great nephew is Joe Johnston, the Hollywood movie director. You know, he directed Werewolf and Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and a bunch of other films. And so I always, and his mother actually bought a couple copies of the book, mail order. And so I always hoping and dreaming he might find that story and go, wow, I got to turn that into a Hollywood film. And, you know, but that's a great story that needs to be told. But until that time, you can read his memoir. We sell his book at our website for $15.
Okay. Well, let me push you. If you said you want to do dozens, let me push you for one more. Go a little further out from Sandusky. What's another story? If you've got dozens, where else would you go if you went further away?
I'd go earlier in history than the Civil War. Probably something with the Mexican-American War, the Seminole Indian Wars, or 1812, something there. I don't have a specific story in mind, but those periods are underrepresented in film, and so that would be a fun era to portray.
Okay. So that sort of sums up my next question, where I was going to say, what historic areas interest you that you haven't gone to yet visually?
Yeah, antebellum. So the first 60 years of the 19th century. But, you know, I kind of don't really see myself making any more films. I don't consider myself a filmmaker. I'm just a museum director who made one film and kind of got lucky that I had a lot of help, and the film got finished and succeeded. And, you know, so I don't really go forward thinking about, like, because I don't have the money or energy to make any films unless somebody's paying and driving me around in a golf cart.
Well, I'm glad you made this one, Greg, and I'm glad that we have it so people can see it, because you're right. This is history at 55 miles an hour minimum. Unless you're on the train, then it might be a little bit quicker with that thing going around. Yeah,
I mean, we really set up some great shots. I mean, it's just some really cool things. You know, the scene where the alarm bell goes off to tell people, like, it's an air raid siren. Well, we actually found the original order for the emergency signal, and it was 12 rings on the bell. I think it was 12, might have been 13, but it was a finite number of rings on the bell. Well, I went up in that cupola on the courthouse. That's the same bell.
Wow.
And I took an audio recorder and I sat there with a hammer and I ranged it that 13 times. So when you hear that bell in the film, it is the same bell that rang the alarm back then as ringing it in the film with the same signal. And so we had all sorts of, I guess you call them Easter eggs like that throughout the film. One of our officers in the film wore a red sash that was actually belonged to one of his VMI classmates who was killed in Iraq, and it was his modern dress sash, which is essentially the same as a Civil War sash. So he was kind of wearing that to honor his fallen friend.
Wow.
We just had so many Easter eggs, and I think the director's commentary, I tease out a lot of those, but we like putting those in. The scene where young Ada is writing in her journal by the desk. Well, just for the heck of it, we have her original journal that she is quoting from. We took the original journal and it's sitting on the desk. We don't point to it or make any mention of it, but if you look in the shot, you'll see an old journal book on the desk. That is the actual journal that she wrote that has the words that are being narrated as the young lady is writing in her fake journal.
Wow.
We just did so many of those things because, most of them were easy to do and they were fun to do, and they have a lot of meaning to the people that were involved in the film.
And to the film itself and to the story itself, it sounds like. Well, let me spin us toward media, because I said I would tell people what a grip is, because people always asking when we're talking about the industry. And I think this is probably Andrew, but grips in the industry go ahead. They move things, they shape light with flags and silks and other things, and they keep other people from falling down, particularly people like me who are camera operators by trade. One of the jobs is as a dolly grip. And I'm just turning on a shot here that a pipe dolly was made for this using PVC pipe, plywood, and some special wheels. And the string that you see there, it can be pulled gently, and that camera can go ahead and pull back. And as you see movement and shots, this is a little bit of a shot of how to go ahead and do that when you're making Hunter's Raid.
Yep, that is Andrew. And he built that dolly rig, and we used it in all different places, and it was amazing. It was amazing.
Well, let's finish up here. Go ahead and brag a little bit. I've got 3 statues sitting on the image here. Talk to me about how Hunter's Raid did with awards and what you have sitting there.
Well, totally after the fact. So we put the film out. We put it out on DVD, and then 4 or 5 years, no, a couple years later. And I think I mailed copies to like different media places, and I sent a copy to Blue Ridge Public Television, and the guy that at that time that ran Blue Ridge Public Television was an Army veteran. He liked Army stories, and he liked our stories, and he's like, yeah, I want to show it. And we're like, okay, cool. And so they actually showed it during one of their pledge weeks, which, we came in and did interviews in the studio live, and if you buy membership at this level, you get this book, you get the DVD autographed, and so forth. And that was a lot of fun. We sold a lot of DVDs that way, and in that week, they probably showed it a dozen times, and then they did it again for another week a year or two later, and then they did it again another week. But the interesting thing is that once they showed it, the program was no longer a DVD, but it was actually a TV program. And we thought, well, let's enter it into Emmy consideration. And we had no idea. We did not build it to be to fit any Emmy category, but we found it did fit long form documentary, and we submitted it. I think it was like $200 for every submission. Whether you win or not, you have to pay $200. So I would have loved to put a lot of other names on the submission, but it was $200 a pop. But if their names were on it, they would have gotten an Emmy too. And we submitted it. It was actually the Kansas City, Missouri and Oklahoma, Kansas and Missouri PBS region that judged it. The first set of DVDs I sent out that we burned, I think it might have been, I'm not sure what, somehow we had to burn our own DVDs. We could not send them the commercial DVD. The DVDs didn't work, and in their rules they say if the DVDs don't work, you're done. But they actually called me up and said, hey, your DVDs don't work. Can you send out some real quick? And I was like, yeah. And so I got some more burned up, like whatever, 6 for the judges, sent them out, and then they reviewed, and we got nominated. and they had the awards event was up at the museum in Washington, D.C. We're in the capital region, which is Virginia, Maryland, and D.C., which is a pretty competitive, high-quality region. You know, there's a couple, L.A., New York, Washington, D.C. Those are top-flight PBS regions, or Emmy, television program regions. And so, and then we even debated, do we even want to go up? It's a long trip, and what if we go up and we don't win? It'll just feel like a waste. But my friend Daniel, who built the boxcar, said, no, let's go. We got to go. I said, all right, well, let's go. And we went up there, and amazingly, it won. It won documentary category as a program on its own, and then it won best director. A writer director, and then Andrew won an Emmy for editing, and that was just amazing. It was a long night. You've probably been to those before, but it literally is like a 4-hour evening because they have to go through all of the, it's like the Academy Awards. It just takes 4 or 5 hours. So we're sitting there for 4 hours, but it was worth it.
It was. So, well, let's bring the evening to an end. I'll give you last word, Greg. Any final thoughts here?
No, just thanks for having me on, and thanks for having Hunter's Raid on Stream History Fix. And I hope all the best for History Fix. It's a great concept and great idea. And the History Channel doesn't do history anymore for a long time. And so we've needed, this type of platform for bona fide history content. So, I encourage anybody interested in history content to check out History Fix, because you're not going to see as much of that on cable. They're going to show other stuff.
Yeah, well, you can come here and find it. Folks, we'll leave you with a look at a card here that has a code on the bottom. You can go to historyfix.com, sign up on the website, use the discount code here, Hunter Raid, for 20% off the first year if you use the annual plan. And after you've signed up online, we have 6 branded apps, whether you're Apple, Google, Amazon Fire, Roku. You can go ahead and use your apps to go ahead and search your app store to find it, but the discounts only work on the website. Thanks for spending some time with Greg and with me this evening. We will see you next time.